Friends, continuing the discussion on physiology of pain. Today I will be dealing with processing of pain at various levels in the neuroaxis. Cartoon shown in this slide, you can see the starting of the pain, then traversing through the nerve to the spinal cord, and then to the medulla, pons, midbrain, the cortex, and the various parts of the cortex. We will try to look into these all various areas for the pain processing. To summarize the pathway, the pain originating from the nociceptor is relayed in the dorsal horn WDR neuron, wide dynamic range neuron, and from here the axons cross to the opposite side, ascend as a lateral spinal thalamic tract. This lateral spinal thalamic tract reach the VPL and then relay into the parietal cortex, somatosensory cortex, shown as a green path. This is the main pathway. From this green path you can see the collaterals, one at the medulla, rostroventral medulla, and the other at the parabrachial nucleus. Third collateral is at the periaqueductal gray. The fibers relayed in rostroventral medulla and paraqueductal gray and even the parabrachial nucleus, they form the reticular system. From this reticular system, this is a spino-reticular pathway because there is no direct pathway to spino-reticular relay. From here, reticulothalamic tracts originate and they reach the thalamus and relay in intralaminar and reticular nucleus of the thalamus. And these will project to the entire cortical mantle and also to the interthalamic nuclei. And these fibers are not shown, they are shown in the earlier slides. The collaterals given to parabrachial nucleus, from here the axons of the parabrachial nuclear fibers, they reach to amygdala and then to insular cortex, cingulate cortex, or to the hypothalamus. They form the component of the paleo-spinothalamic tract. The blue one forms the paleo-spinothalamic tract because this will carry the affective component of the pain sensation. Then the collaterals given to rostroventral medulla, they will now excite the raphenucleus in the medulla, and that would send to the spinal cord through the bulbospinal tract. These are serotonergic and norepinephrenergic fibers. They relay into the gate at layer lamina 5. Also, the fibers relayed in periaqueductal gray, they also descend down to the spinal tract, forming a reticulospinal tract, and also the periaqueductal gray cells stimulate the raphenucleus. Through that, the descending paths they project onto the gate or inhibition of the ascending inputs. Now let us look into the pain processing at various levels. The level 1 is the site of injury, that is the local site. You can see here at the receptor level. Then comes the spinal cord, that's level 2. Then the medulla, rostroventral part of the medulla. Then pontomedullary junction, that is a parabrachial nucleus, and the midbrain, thalamus, parietal cortex, cingulate cortex, that is anterior cingulate cortex there, insular cortex, and then prefrontal cortex. We will try to look into the processing in all these areas. The brain processing begins at the local level itself. First of all, there are dual pathways. The dual, that is a shorting, the dual pathways isolate the pain as a fast pain or a slow pain. That is with a low threshold or high threshold. Usually the nociceptors are silent. There is no pain physiologically. And once there is some injury or some trigger, there will be pain. That is, first processing happens at the local site. This will result in withdrawal reflex so as to move the part away from the site of injury. The next step is to attend to the part which is being injured or the noxious nociceptor activated. That means seeking solace by dipping the hand or the part in the cold or application of the ice, so on. C fiber activation comes late after the fast pain disappears. A dull, aching, a nagging pain begins, and this pain is non-adapting, and always it will try to bring the attention or inform the brain that there is something wrong. Because of the injury or the inflammation, or because the pain, if you see, there is a potential or actual injury. Here that will result in a swelling. As far as the inflammation is concerned, that would further activate the C fiber. There will be an increase in the temperature because of the inflammation. That further increases the sensitivity of the nociceptors. In addition, there is a sensitization. That means there is a stretch, the mechanical stretch, the thermal, the presence of chemicals, all these things together, they will sensitize the nociceptors and they lower their sensitivity. That is the sensitization. This sensitization apparently true in case of the inflammatory pain, and that is a primary hyperalgesia. Sometimes the nociceptors are silent. They are triggered by the neurons, the fibers which are carrying these things in their path. There is something, a trigger point that will produce an allodynia. Allodynia is a condition in which the non-nociceptive stimuli now will be able to evoke painful stimulus. Just like an inflamed part, if you touch normally in that site, there is no pain. When you touch a little pressure, there will be a pain, what is called tenderness. This is allodynia. Going on to the processing component, there will be an increased vascularity of the part. The increased vascularity brings in large amount of blood. The microcirculation is increased. That would dilute the chemicals released because of the injury, cell degradation, and because of the inflammation. and these chemicals are drained into the circulatory system if it is open. If it is not open, there will be a accumulation of these chemicals, and this accumulation of the chemicals will continue to activate the nociceptors and produce a sort of a throbbing, dull pain, which happens in case of a pus or a carbuncle, where it is capsulated. Further, the pain brings the notice of the individual, that is attention, diverts the attention of the individual to the part, one aspect, and the person always touches the part and massages and rubs. That may reduce to an extent, not to a great extent, to an extent, pain or edema transiently. However, since inflammation is there, there will be chemicals which are still persisting and the pain continues. These are the means of local pain processing. In the spinal cord, the pain is processed in a definitive way. One, there is a shorting of the inputs, that is the inputs coming from the myelinated A delta fibers and the inputs coming from unmyelinated C fibers. A delta fibers relay in lamina 1, 2 and 5. The C fibers are relayed in 1 and 2. In the layer 5, there is a projecting neuron, what is called a wide dynamic range neuron. And this wide dynamic range neuron will receive input from A delta fibers. From there, the collaterals reach to the flexor group of motor neurons via an interneuron to evoke withdrawal reflex, also known as a flexor reflex. This is to bring the motion so that the part affected is moved away from the site of noxious stimulus. The wide dynamic range neuron located in lamina 5 will receive an interneuronal connection from the lamina 2. These are substantia gelatinosa cells, and these are encapsulinergic neurons. These neurons are excited by the C fibers, which release substance P, and that will produce what is called the closing of the gate or the inhibition of the gate. That is done by the large diameter fibers, whereas the small diameter fibers, that is the unmyelinated fibers, will not inhibit the gate. Substance P is released from C fibers, glutamate from A delta fibers, serotonin, norepinephrine from the descending path, enkephalin from the substantia gelatinosa cell to the WDR, that is a wide dynamic range neuron which is projecting to the thalamus. Glycine and GABA are inhibitory interneurons. These are the major transmitters. Here they will try to inhibit or excite. These gating of the WDR is also modulated by the supraspinal inputs coming from the raphe nucleus or from the reticular system. In the medulla, the pain processing is primarily to keep the person aroused and to have the autonomic responses. So that means the first relay is into the rostroventral medulla, that would give to raphe nucleus. The raphe nucleus that sends a descending inputs to the dorsal horn neurons in the spinal cord. These are analgesic projections. They will try to prevent or block the sensory inputs. Then from the reticular system, thalamic projections reach to the intralaminar and reticular nucleus for arousal response. These are associated with autonomic responses. From here, the autonomic components are excited to increase the heart rate, increase the blood pressure and respiration. That is what the processing happening in the medulla. In the parabrachial nucleus, that is a pontomedullary area, that means between the upper pontine level and the mesenchymal level. So these neurons connect to amygdala. Amygdala is center for emotions, for all the responses. Amygdala is involved. That would have all the autonomic controls also, the hypothalamic control also, the endocrine control also. So it connects to amygdala and informs about the pain. These parabrachial neurons also give collaterals to the reticular system that would again pass on to the arousal response. From the amygdala, the fibers reach to the insular cortex. These insular cortex, they are the sensory attributes of the affective pain. That I would come when I talk about insular cortex. Then they will also send impulses to the cingulate cortex. So for the action, for the cognitive component of this affective pain, that in turn talks to prefrontal cortex. This is what happens by the parabrachial nuclear relay. Lateral spinothalamic tract, while ascending to the thalamus, also relay in the midbrain mesenchymal area, that is around the periaqueductal region. This makes a collection of neurons, what is called a periaqueductal gray. These neurons release endorphins and enkephalins. These endogenous opiates, they will suppress the ascending information reaching the thalamus or to the other areas. So that means they are inhibitory. In addition, these periaqueductal gray neurons project onto the raphe nucleus. In turn, they excite, and this raphe nucleus will send pulpospinal tract, that is serotonergic tract, to the spinal gate control mechanism that will suppress the gate control. That is the C fiber pain, which is also suppressed by the descending projections like this. These periaqueductal gray also participate in the reticular system. Thus, they will send information to the reticulothalamic tract, relay into the intralaminar nucleus and on the reticular nucleus of the thalamus, stimulating the entire cortical mantle for arousal response. The pain here, this is also regulating the behavior because it is connected to hypothalamus and also connected to the autonomic centers, altering the cardiorespiratory parameters. bringing in increased blood pressure, heart rate and respiratory rate, in addition to other autonomic changes. Interesting part about the periaqueductal gray is that it receives reciprocal inputs from the cingulate cortex and the prefrontal cortex. And this periaqueductal gray matter have the nociceptive on and the nociceptive off switches, which are controlled by the cingulate cortex and the prefrontal cortex. So that means the stimulation of the periaqueductal gray, some neurons may produce the pro-nociceptive, that means they prolong the nociception. The stimulation of the sum of these things will produce the anti-nociceptive activity. So that means the cingulate cortex utilizes cingulate cortex and the prefrontal cortex utilizes this aspect of the periaqueductal neurons. Pain processing in thalamus. Thalamus is a part in which the pain is partially processed, because the thalamotomy or ablation of the parietal cortex do not abolish the pain. The pain persists and it is vague and diffuse, along with all other autonomic responses and discomfort. So that means thalamus primitively processes the pain. That is one component. Thalamus also sorts the information and after sorting relay into the parietal cortex, the sensory area number 1, area 312, for the epicritic component of the pain, that is the localization, discrimination, that is knowing about the attributes and other characteristics of the involved with the pain. In the thalamus, there will be some of the fibers go to the dorsomedial nucleus. Because of the intrathalamic projections, they will reach to cingulate cortex. The intralaminar and reticular nucleus, as already mentioned, they carry the information to the entire cortical areas, all the cortical areas, for arousal response. The posterior medial ventral nuclear relay connects to the insular cortex. Thus, thalamus is the site where a primitive processing is done, and it is sorted and sent to the epicritic analysis, discriminative analysis, and also sent to the cingulate cortex for the affective component or behavioral component, while keeping the individual in a arousal state. Pain reaches the somatosensory area number 1. Here it is localized, and from this somatosensory area it will connect to the S2, somatosensory area 2, and association area, where attributes of the pain are detailed and delineated. The somatosensory association area, that is parieto-occipitotemporal area, try to make postural adjustments along with the eye and head coordination or movements required to be achieved for a particular painful response. The neocortical projections to the parietal cortex area S1 and S2 and the somatosensory area, somatosensory association area, assist the limbic system for the cognitive and affective responses of the pain. That will bring about the behavioral changes. Cingulate cortex, or the major area of the limbic system, is one of the pathway in which the affective component or behavioral component of the pain is processed. The cingulate cortex is connected with the somatosensory area, thalamus, amygdala, hippocampus, prefrontal cortex, the motor cortex, the caudate nucleus, and nucleus accumbens and periaqueductal gray. This will modulate the affective and motivational aspects of pain. What are those affective? That means the one which is producing the behavior. So motivational aspect is whether that particular pain is producing certain amount of the conditioning. So those aspects are associated. Sometimes the operational conditioning, where in a stimulation of these areas may produce the rats to go for the food pellets. So that means that is the motivation. That means even if there is some amount of a painful situation, that would the pain is tolerated. So that is one aspect. And suppose you are in a painful condition, but what happens, because you have a certain things or certain tasks to perform, what you do, you suppress that, and it is through this cingulate cortex, that is the motivational, because you have a aim fixed to achieve. The processing in the cingulate cortex provides the emotional expression in response to pain. Whatever may be the type of emotional expression, it is screaming, crying, or producing all the autonomic responses, or dejection. So all those things are coming through this pain. Further, the cingulate cortex provide the responses according to the situation. Sometimes even a trivial pain produces severe emotional change or outburst, whereas in certain occasions even the severe pain will not produce the emotional outburst, as happens in case of a soldier fighting in the front line. Even if he loses limb also, he does not feel the pain of the loss of the limb. So this is what the cingulate does. Precisely, it modulates the pain by reducing the sensory input at the sensory cortex, as well as it will alter the affective and motivational and cognitive components associated with the amygdala, hippocampus, prefrontal cortex. It will suppress that, or it will modulate that depending upon the context. Usually, lesions or destruction of the cingulate cortex do not alter the pain rating. Pain remains. But for the person, pain has become less bothersome and less distressing. These are the affective components. Insular cortex is the judgmental cortex, and it will try to weigh the pain modality. It receives inputs from various components that is somatosensory area, from the cingulate cortex, from the amygdala, from the prefrontal cortex, and it will decide certain important features. It will identify the pain, good, bad, or the qualitative aspect. Quantitatively, it will try to see the intensity, the low or high intensity. And it integrates the other sensory modalities to the pain. And it evolves an introspective aspect regarding pain. So that means the person starts worrying about pain, or he stops worrying about the pain. And the expressions of it will excite the emotions. In turn, these emotions are exteriorized through the cingulate cortex. Withdrawal from the social contexts is seen with a person subjected to pain. That means socialization, whether the person wants to mix or does not want to mix, the insular cortex does. And to perform certain tasks and during the pain, or to do what to do with the pain, or how to tolerate the pain. So this is one of the decision making area. It also controls the autonomic activity. In case of the lesions of the insular cortex, the person loses the affective component of the pain. That means all the behavioral responses arising out of the pain are lost. He will not cry, he will not sigh, show the discomfort or distress. But the discriminative components of the pain persist. So that means this is a area in which the behavioral contexts are preserved or are brought about for the pain. It is seen that in olden times, the prefrontal lobotomy was performed for chronic intractable pain, to relieve the chronic intractable pain of the malignancy or other neurological disorders. Now let us see what the prefrontal cortex, or how the prefrontal cortex processes the pain. This area analyzes the inputs from the parietal cortex, that is somatosensory area 1 and somatosensory area 2, and the somatosensory association cortex, that is practically all the parieto-occipito-temporal association area, receives our inputs from the hippocampus regarding the particular modality of the pain are also analyzed, and the inputs from the periaqueductal gray, they are analyzed. The thalamus, the medial dorsal nucleus of the thalamus, amygdala, and the basal nuclei, and accordingly it will provide the information for the execution. Experimentally, it is seen that acute or chronic pain induce changes in the neurotransmitters in the prefrontal area. Also, there is a gene expression for the neurotransmitters. There is a glial cell proliferation, and even the neuroinflammatory process is observed in the prefrontal area in animals having acute or chronic pain. This area is specialized for providing the attention to the pain. So that means we keep bothering about the pain all the time because of the prefrontal cortex. If there is no prefrontal cortex, then there is no attention to the pain. Pain remains and you don't care. So it is something like that. So that means that is why the prefrontal lobotomy was performed. So that is why the person was not bothered or not having an attention for what is happening to his body. There are two aspects or dual aspects in the medial prefrontal cortex. Each are the opposing. One is anti-nociceptive, one is pro-nociceptive. The anti-nociceptive effects are modulated via the neocortical areas, reach to the periaqueductal gray and modulate the pain. That means that will stimulate the periaqueductal gray matter to release the endogenous opiates to suppress the pain. At the same time, in different occasions, it may help. It may see that the pain continues, because what happens if there is a non-adaptability of the pain and the pain is continuing, then it will make that the body should be informed that there is a chronicity or a chronification of the pain. So this is done by the prefrontal cortex, and that will activate the pro-nociceptive switch present in the periaqueductal gray, and that will continue to send impulses to the cingulate, the nucleus accumbens and the tegmental areas. And these, along with the hippocampus, they will just try to make the pain as a chronic one. Say for example, with the type of migraine or any other type of chronic pain, you can just think about it. The prefrontal cortex is utilized by several of the pain management strategies like biopsychosocial strategies. These include the transcranial magnetic stimulation that will suppress the pain, transcranial direct current stimulation, or use of antidepressants to reduce the pain because they are also associated with the depression. The acupuncture induced analgesia, though acupuncture may produce the spinal cord level certain amount of a gate inhibition, but here also if you are using the acupuncture at the higher level, that may reduce the pain. The cognitive behavioral therapy, the mindfulness, that is attention diverting, the music therapy, that means listening to a soothing music, or doing exercise. The doing exercise also will involve the prefrontal cortex and then to the motor areas, and that would also release enormous amounts of the endorphins and caffeines or some of those neurochemicals that will suppress the pain. Or support from the friend or a partner, that is a partner support, that is sympathy, empathy, meditation and prayer, all that biopsychosocial management strategies are dealt through the prefrontal cortex. So that means one can see about the wide, broad spectrum involvement of the prefrontal cortex for the modulation of the pain. I have collected the information from the following resource materials: The Principles of Neuroscience by Kendall, Guyton's Textbook of Medical Physiology, the Genung's Review of Medical Physiology, article from Besabam et al., appeared in Cell, and the article from M et al. Appeared in International Journal of Molecular Science. In the next lecture, we will try to discuss the pain management strategies with a special reference to the gate control theory. Thank you till then. Bye.